and really fell in love with that. And I was introduced to that by my middle school industrial arts teacher, who is still my climbing partner and really my mentor in the mountains still today, decades and decades. I won't say how many decades, but many decades later. So I have a really, as well as a passion for the mountains, a strong interest in risk and risk taking and decision making around uncertainty and that those kinds of things. So really look forward to talking with everyone tonight.
Great. And just for a couple housekeeping things, I just got side chatted by my awesome secretary, Lynn, about how I forgot to let everyone know we are going to record tonight so that people who couldn't make it tonight could view the recording. So if you're not comfortable being recorded, please either shut off your video or, I feel like if your video's off and you don't speak, then I guess you're not really being recorded. But either way, we're going to have the record running so that other people can watch this who weren't able to make it. We're also going to have a pretty open dialogue in terms of a Q&A later in the discussion. So as you think about questions, maybe write them down or hold them on the side. There'll be plenty of opportunity for that as we progress. And if you're not comfortable asking a question, over the video, there's also a comment section. And sorry for all the feedback. I just figured out who that was and muted them. There is a comment section where you can also leave a question if you have one. So, all right, that should be it for housekeeping items. So Ty, we're going to get into sort of some interpersonal dynamics type of discussions, particularly with, group hiking. But, you mentioned you started out pretty early. And for those of us who've read your books, we understand, some of your, I guess, bigger situations, I guess, for lack of a better word, where you felt pushed to kind of go maybe beyond where you were comfortable, but because you were with other people. But did you have anything, I guess, like more in the beginning stages, like before you got to that level, like when you first started out in hiking, where you kind of just like it hit you that like, hey, this isn't just a walk in the woods?
Yeah, I think, well, in elementary school, you have boundless energy. So you don't really realize how long your teachers are keeping you out in the backcountry, and you're just psyched to be with your friends. And so you just kind of don't pay a lot of attention to that. But I think as I got older, and those challenges that my climbing partner and I set for ourselves, would become more challenging over time, as they should, as you progress into the sport and develop experience and gain some wisdom. Yeah, I definitely started to take it more seriously as those objectives started to get bigger and more complex. Than showing up at the trailhead, everything's prepared for you. Really, all you have to do is make sure your shoes are tied and you're moving upward with everybody else. So definitely went through that change.
We often talk about those supplies, the essential supplies. Like we talk about the essentials a lot in the hiking community, the gear we need for navigation and survival, but safety definitely goes beyond stuff, right? I mean, that's sort of what we're here to talk about, sort of those like interpersonal dynamics. Could you just give us a few of, I guess, either by story or just through, direct answer, some of those other safety priorities that kind of come to mind outside of the stuff that we need to be out there?
Yeah, I think the 10 essentials are critically important and really the base level for what each of us needs when we're going out. I do think there's a couple of other ones that I've tried to stress to folks. And I think the first one is the higher summits forecast. Really important to have a sense of what the weather is forecasted to be in the higher summits, because I think that can have a lot to do with itinerary and where you plan to go, what you're going to bring. And I think I've also talked about the fact it's not just the higher summits forecast for that day you're going. I think it's really important to look at that forecast for the following day and maybe the day after that, because if something doesn't go as planned, it's recognizing what the weather is going to be for an extended period of time and preparing for that accordingly. And I think the other essential in all of this, that's probably less tangible, and that's self-awareness, knowing what my level of experience is, where I'm planning to go, and whether my skills and experience align with what I've set out to do, and who I'm going with. And I think we'll probably get into that quite a bit as we go along tonight.
Yeah, I think we as a group that kind of promotes group hiking, we have clearly some other, I guess you'd say, risk that come to mind. Setting expectations, communication, so forth. And we'll probably dig into that a little bit as well. That's a great point, though, about like knowing the weather the days after in case you don't get down. I mean, in particular, that'd be that's important all the time, but even more so, I would say, in the winter, right?
Yeah, and I think like you said, all 4 seasons. I mean, it can get down to 50 or lower, particularly above tree line in the White Mountains at any point in time in the course of the year, over the course of the year. And when you start getting below 50, the risk of hypothermia increases as that temperature drops. And if you add in precipitation, or you get wet at a stream, or it's raining or sleeting or what have you, I think it just amplifies the risk.
Mm-hmm. What are your I remember reading a lot of it and finding it pretty interesting. So if you can kind of dig back in the memory bank and you just kind of go over with everyone, since you just brought it up, just sort of I guess the first signs of hypothermia.
Yeah, I think one of the telltale signs is I'm starting to feel cold, and that it doesn't take much for that to happen, but that should be a really early red flag that I need to start paying closer attention to thermal regulation. Where is it time for me to add a shell or an insulating layer? Am I overheating? There is the opposite effect here. It's not just hypothermia, it's heat exposure. And do I need to shed layers? Do I need to completely change out the wet layers of clothing that I'm wearing? So again, and then you move into shivering. I think that's the red flags getting more amplified, and we just need to be paying closer attention to that. I need to be hydrating with warm beverages and making sure I'm eating properly to keep that engine fueled, because that's what your body's relying on to generate heat: exercise and food.
And then just thinking about the when you're looking at the weather for a couple days, in the book Where You'll Find Me, it seemed like she had pretty, although she didn't check the weather in the morning, it seemed like she had pretty good idea of both the weather that was upcoming, although she thought she was going to get ahead of it, but also her exit plans and her emergency plans. How even when I hike, I can say that that's somewhere I have to improve, myself, is just really like mapping out those emergency plans, those exit plans. Like, do you just map that out? I mean, is that just a map exercise, just taking the time and commitment to, sitting down and figuring all the potential options that you have?
Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of members of the rescue community as part of my research, and many of them they're expert guides, instructors, and I can think about a couple of conversations I've had with some of them where, yeah, they will lay out a map as they put their itinerary together, and they're identifying areas where they can get below tree line if they have to, outlet trails that might take them to a trailhead far away from where they started, but at least gets them back. But I also, to your point, I can't emphasize enough the importance of knowing when to turn around, and factoring in time, distance, weather, daylight, all of that into that decision, because it can be very easy to continue to be drawn toward what you've set out to do for that day, and not realizing just how far away you're getting from a place you're familiar with, or an easily visible trailhead, or what have you. So
We have a lot of people who, they're really interested in hiking. Like we have a ton of people in the group who I'm fairly certain have never actually joined a hike or gone hiking. They like the idea of hiking. And then when we talk to some of them, we communicate with a lot of members, many of whom, say, well, I'm going to join a buddy hike one of these days. And they, after hiking, usually on like a turtle hike, they say they underestimated their ability, meaning they've been putting off hiking for so long because they just thought, they don't want to go alone, but they also don't want to go with a group and slow everybody down if they can't keep up or have to turn around and make someone else turn around with them. But do you kind of lean into that being a little, I guess, preferable over somebody who's overestimating their
yeah,
abilities,
yeah,
like from a safety standpoint?
yeah. I think better to underestimate your ability, perform at a level higher than what you thought, dust off your ego when you get back down, learn from it, and then continue to progress, rather than overestimating this, not having your ego in check, arriving at an itinerary that you've set for yourself, and at hopefully just getting humbled by that, and learning from that experience as well. So yeah, I'd rather underestimate, I think, in a situation like that, than maybe go too far.
And if I would say too, if anybody feels like they fit that, who's come onto this call, we do have some very steady leads who make it a point to try to do beginner hikes. And so I would, Andrew Barlow would be one of those people, and we have a few others as well. And so those are your opportunities if you are one of those people who's really the only thing keeping you from getting out there is your concern about um, being a burden to others. These are hikes that they go slower and they're going to take their time. And if there's usually more than one lead, so if someone has to go back, um, there's somebody willing and ready to take you back down if you can't get to the top. But it's a safe place in that respect, that at least you have somebody who kind of knows the trail already, has hiked it before, is comfortable, is trained in many cases in first aid. And that's not always the case. Again, this goes back to communication and just that pre-hike communication, which I think is, so important. So Ty, we do have folks who are, like Andrew, who I just mentioned, who are kind of admins or very close to the organization, who are putting these hikes out there, and they're saying, hey, we know we're going to get newer hikers, and we know what to expect. But we also open it up. I mean, it is a kind of a grassroots organization where we allow people who just want to go on a hike and are just looking for company and looking to connect with other hikers and looking for safety in numbers. Like if you sprain your ankle or you break a leg or something, and you don't want to be there alone, they want to have maybe 3, 4, 5 people to kind of hike the mountain with. The social aspect, of course, for many people is very fun. Um, but what do you kind of see as being sort of the interpersonal dynamics on something like that sort of situation that would cause you to kind of just take a step back and say, hey, I would want to make sure that these folks were aware of this?
Yeah, and I think the beauty of hiking buddies is it provides something for everybody. I mean, everyone everyone in the group is learning. And what I mean by that is there's opportunities and options for people that are starting from zero. And I think it's really important for us to remind the group and ourselves, every person starts at zero. At some point, everyone started with no experience whatsoever. Um, and I think if we just keep that in mind, remember where we came from if we're more experienced, um, and just remembering the people we're going with were exactly where I was at one point starting out brand new. I think that really creates a culture where people are comfortable and can come in with a certain comfort level and level of confidence that Hiking Buddies is here for the right reason. So you have people starting out that are learning in a safe environment, in a supportive environment, people that are still progressing through that experience curve, and then people with more experience are now having an opportunity to lead and develop leadership skills and instill their knowledge on people starting out who again were exactly where they were at one point in their trajectory with hiking and backcountry travel. So I think the tone that the organization sets for regardless of people have been going or showing up for a long time or are still contemplating showing up for the first time is really important. You and I have had some conversations about the standard that exists within Hiking Buddies where there have been instances of negativity and incivility, and the admins, I think, have done a really good job of monitoring that and taking action, which I think communicates to the larger group that this is a safe place to learn and grow. And then I think the conversations that are happening in lead ups to hikes are really important with people who maybe have more experience with Hiking Buddies, reaching out to those that are new to the group if they recognize they're new to the group, and again, really just trying to set an early positive tone that you're in the right place and we're here for the right reasons. We want the same things, and we're here to help give you that backcountry experience that you're seeking and that sense of community.
And when we talk about the community here, we talked about it a little bit on the Slasher podcast as well, when we sat down there as well. But we do as an organization want to reach younger people, and with that with that goal in mind, some of the plans after Emily's hike with some of those funds are definitely going to be very focused on trying to ensure education and training for some of these young people. In fact, I just read about one the other day that had a rescue. But how do we get how do we get younger people into an organization, like Hiking Buddies, to just kind of connect? Like, what do you think? I know this is more of a question probably for my board than for you, but what do you think can kind of drive that age group that we could maybe do a little bit differently? Because I think at the end of the day, like, our goal is to make sure everybody's safe, but also we want to try to find maybe perhaps where there's less experience, right? And they're generally younger folks have less experience because they have less years, right?
Yeah, and I it's a great question, probably better for the board, but I'm going to take a swing at it anyway. But I think it's about meeting that generation where they are, recognizing they communicate in a certain way in terms of through social media and texting and those kinds of things. But I also think they, from my perspective, very open to community building, to supporting causes that are meaningful to them and enriching for them, and I think wanting to learn and get out there and I think one of the things I really admire about this generation is I think as I was growing up, and maybe you have felt similar things, it was work and family or personal life, and you're trying to balance the two. And I think this generation has just done a really admirable job of living and having new experiences and getting out in a way that I didn't. And I think that my generation can learn a lot from that. I think the pandemic's had an effect on all of us in that regard, where I think there's more gratitude, there's more appreciation for time and how valuable time is, and that it's finite. So I don't know if that helps. I think your board's going to have more insight and wisdom
Yeah.
than me. So
Yeah. So, we talked a little bit about it, but communication, setting expectations, like that's something that we try to push for everyone who's going to lead a hike, that they should be having a pre-hike conversation via chat, like some way to communicate, as well as, having that communication and expectation setting, like at the trailhead as well, not waiting until the trailhead, but just, additional conversations at the trailhead, as it stands, as to, are we, what happens if, we're a group of 8 and there's, 3 or 4 that are clearly faster than the other 3 or 4, are we comfortable with, splitting into 2 groups? How small are these groups able to get to? Are we comfortable with 3 groups of 3? Those things should be discussed ahead of time. But what would you how do you speak to someone if you're on an actual hike and you see them doing something that you would consider, I don't know, unsafe, or they're pushing for something that you're not really super, in tune with or comfortable with? They're like, hey, I'm just going to go off, or whatever, which I guess is fine. Like, that's where I struggle a little bit, because I tell people, be prepared to hike alone. Have all your essentials, know your route, don't depend on others. Be ready to hike alone, because you never know if you're going to show up and the other 5 people are going to bail on you and you may be hiking by yourself. Or if you're hiking up and, I always tell people too, it's like a first date, right? Like you're going up with 3 people and things just, this is like a date and it's just not working out. Like there's not going to be any dessert afterwards or anything like this. There's always that possibility, right? We rarely, if ever, have run into that situation, but it is a concern of mine as, an organization, that, you know how do you have that conversation, like, hey, listen, I'm not comfortable with this, or with what you're doing, or this, that we're just changing the trail on a whim. I told my family we were going this way, and now you're telling us we're going to go this way. Like, how do you have those, like, those really difficult, I guess, conversations? And
yeah,
like, I don't know if that
yeah,
made
I think
sense.
no, it does. And I think a point I want to make is, if one person shows up to the trailhead, there's complexity. If more than one person shows up at the trailhead, there's complexity. So, because we're all human, right? We have different motivators, drivers, reasons for being there, doing what we're doing. And I think if in the example that you're giving, the if you're feeling uncomfortable in a group and seeing behavior that seems to be falling outside the norm or the established expectations or the standard that's been agreed upon before the hike even started, the longer, if you're uncomfortable, then likely somebody else is as well. And so the question then becomes, how long do we let this behavior go on? Because the longer it goes on, the more discomfort and anxiety is going to be generated within the group, and the more of a liability that group becomes to itself. So to me, I think if candor and leadership in these instances are really important, and respectful candor. It's just, and maybe it starts with, hey, we had agreed, we had developed this plan and agreed on it down below. Are we still following this plan? Or because it looks like we're deviating from it. And I think, maybe it might make sense for us to regroup here and have a conversation to see if we're all in agreement that the plans needs to be modified, or if we need to have a conversation about whether it shouldn't be. Easier said than done, but what I would say to folks, because the same things that happen in the mountains from an interpersonal standpoint happen at work, happen within families. And so just take that example and put it down here at sea level, where you've had that happen at work before. What did you do? Or you had it within a relationship that you had. What did you do with that? But I think the longer we remain passive and the more the anxiety level increases, um, again, I think the greater the liability.
Okay, that's that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it is, you know, as you said very early on, like we have a pretty strict group. Like we're a one strike you're out kind of group when it comes to the what you're willing to post on our page as a comment. If there's a post and we think it's rude, you're out of the group. Like it's never been a democracy, and we'll never treat it as one, because we do want it to be a safe space. And I during the Emily Sotelo incident, I think we ended up losing a lot of members, and that was by our choice. We just didn't appreciate some of the banter that was going on, and that was what it was. But we do try to set a standard, and we do try to ensure that people have an understanding of the communication that is expected beforehand, because I do think those conversations beforehand can eliminate a lot of stress when you have a 30-pound pack on your back and you're climbing up a mountain and you're tired. And maybe from a personality standpoint, I might be the only person on earth who gets a little crankier if things aren't going my way, and I have a 30-pound pack and I'm tired. I just hiked miles. um, those interpersonal relationships are usually fun and happy, and we're having a great time going up. But I can imagine that if there was conflict, it would probably be harder to regulate my emotions and regulate, like, sort of how I'm feeling about the situation, and might even carry more than 30 pounds on my back, maybe a little bit of resentment for the remainder of the hike. So I think it's that pre hike, pre meet conversation is just invaluable. And we'll have to just do more about pushing that with our people.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, Ben, to your point is, it's uncomfortable to have these conversations with people when you don't agree on something, or you're afraid you're going to get criticized, or someone's going to snap back at you, or marginalize you within the group. And I think the question I would ask myself, if I'm seeing this happening on the trail in front of me, would you rather have that uncomfortable conversation and try to deal with it now? Or do you want to wait until the possibility that somebody sprains their ankle and those fractures that have been building within that team all rise to the surface when actually somebody needs help, or someone's run out of water and doesn't dare to speak up about it because there's this underlying current within the group that it's not safe for me to say anything. So, and I don't think it happens a lot. I think, based on my conversations with you, Hiking Buddies has a really good track record with this thing. But having conversations like this, and tonight in an open forum, and people talking about it in between this and hikes and lead ups to hikes, I think just again creates a much healthier culture for the group in general and the people that are showing up.
I'm gonna ask one more question, then I'll turn it over to either Lynn or Andrew as the other leads, and then we'll just open it up to the whole group. But I would say it's very rare that, I mean, we're talking a lot about this kind of conflict and everything on the trail, and there are hundreds of hikes going on every year through Hiking Buddies, and we talk to a ton of people, but the number of complaints is very, very minimal. I would say, though, that the one complaint that I've at least seen more than once, so let's just throw it out on the table, and I'd love to get your input on it, is someone joining a hike for which they were dramatically unprepared for from a fitness level and from a speed level, like, somebody who joins a fast hike but is far from a fast pace, right? And then their expectation that the rest of the group's hike is going to be based on their pace because they joined a buddy hike and they want a group to be hiking with them. That's why they joined. But maybe the choice they made as to the hike they chose was definitely inappropriate for the hike that they went on. And so occasionally I'll get the, you know, two fingers pointing, one this way and one that way, that was like, so and again, this has only happened, I think, twice, and we've been, doing hundreds of hikes for 3 years. But I do kind of wonder what your feedback would be. Like, I'm on a hike, and I think even in one of my first hikes, we split off two people off the hike. I think literally it was like hiking buddies when we had like 120 people in the group, and it was tiny, but we did end up splitting off two people in the group, and I felt like that was fine. It was a short hike anyway, but because there was nobody left alone. The group was just so dramatically different in pace. But I do wonder your thoughts. Like, is it the responsibility of the entire the remainder of the group, if they're staying within the plan from the beginning, to be responsible for that individual? And that's a tough question for me, because I feel like, well, if something happened to that individual, I would feel terrible. But at the same time, I feel like if the expectation was you should be prepared to hike alone if you need to, and this just is not working out, and we're not doing a 9-hour hike today, this is supposed to be a 4-hour hike. Like, how do you handle that, like, on the trail?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to depend how far in to the hike you are by the time it becomes obvious this isn't working. Um, and then I think it's questions around. I do think there is a level of responsibility that the team has for the team, whether we have an underperforming team member or not. And so if we have an underperforming team member, I think the team has to make a decision about how that's going to be dealt with. And if that means you're not too far away from the trailhead, the person knows how to get back, the team is comfortable with them going back. Um, if they continue to go along at a slower pace, is that going to itself just create conflict within the group because now everyone has slowed down for one? I mean, there's a lot of hypotheticals in this, but I think it's how much risk, I keep using that word, but what is the risk of that person staying with the group? What is the risk of that person being sent back on their own? Is there another person within the group that would go back with that person? And maybe here's the other thing, that maybe that doesn't get solved on the trail. It may just be that we have to deal with this because we're in it and we're committed. And we just have to deal with what's been handed to us. But I think the work gets done after that, which is, do the admins, is there a conversation with this person so that this person isn't signing up yet again for a group that's at a higher level than they are? I think it's, again, I would look at it as a team at work. That underperforming member needs feedback just as an employee would, and giving them some remedial feedback on, hey, here's how your performance impacted the group that was moving in this direction and intended to do this and couldn't. Here's a more appropriate pace and group for you to consider next time. And then I think, if I know it's a lot to monitor, but if that person's yet again signing up for something that's beyond their experience level, then that's a tougher decision that has to be made, I think, before that hike starts.
Yeah,
I think it's playing the longer game.
Yeah, and we definitely try to we definitely do have those conversations afterwards. I think the one thing that we think of is, like, where I feel a little bit more comfortable with the way that we're setting it up, is that most hikes, or all hikes, are not Hiking Buddies, the organization, is setting up this hike for people, like the AMC, for instance, is setting up a hike as an organization. Like, if Hiking Buddies set up a hike as Hiking Buddies, the organization, then we would have, I think, different parameters than, Jill wants to go hike isolation and she's looking for some company, and she sets those expectations very clearly beforehand that she hikes 2.5 to 3 miles per hour on the flats, and she's a quick hiker, and she wants to get this hike done, in 6.5 hours or whatever, and somebody shows up who hikes 1 mile an hour. I have a hard time telling Jill that she needs to be responsible for what either hiking that hike at 1 mile an hour or responsible for that individual, because at that point I feel like it is now two solo hikes and they're both responsible for their hike. And that's why we always say you need to be responsible for your hike. So that's sort of where I guess Hiking Buddies right now is living. Clearly if you have to slow down a little, it should be fine. Like that's part of it. But when there's just dramatic differences in speed, we don't want people hiking in the dark who planned on being home at 6 p.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like it is kind of like trying to balance something that has Jill in mind, but also Barry or whoever that other person was that was going 1 mile an hour. Like trying to understand like that Jill wasn't signing up as like a employee of Hiking Buddies to be doing this. She just was looking
Yeah.
for some company, right? So that's it's a loaded question, and even when you were answering it, it was like kind of like it just seems like such a loaded question, and it's really you'd like to think that everyone just kind of carries with them some common sense and some compassion and some understanding for where people are, and we certainly will try to continue to flourish that. And I always ask people never to leave somebody single. If you're going to break up the group, try to always maintain two. So
Yeah, I think that's where I'm kind of coming from is, we tell people all the time that the mountain's always going to be there, the summit's going to be at some level. I think that is relevant to the situation you're talking about. It's okay, this was the wrong group today, and there's going to be other opportunities to go out. Maybe we have to make some decisions that we didn't want to make, or we have to do something we didn't plan to do, but in the interest of not leaving that person out there on their own, which if you do, that's probably going to be weighing on you anyway, wondering if that person gets back. I mean, yeah, it's like you said, it's a loaded question. It's so hard to answer unless you're in it. But I do think as Hiking Buddies grows, as there are more opportunities out there, that the groups can develop norms and a culture. And I think, I think these conversations are good because, like you said, it's a very low frequency of problems, which I think says a lot about the people participating, but also the people that are adminning. But the longer that goes on, then the risk becomes complacency, because we never have problems until we do. And so I think to be talking about these things ahead of time and strategizing about them, and it's transparent to the group, and these are open conversations, that kind of heads that off.
Good, thanks. So Lynn or Andrew, do you guys have any questions? Then we're going to open it up.
Hey, Ty, thanks for coming on today and leading the discussion. We're pretty lucky to have you. I always like to know what piece of advice you would give your younger self if you could go back and tell your younger self something.
About climbing, because there's other things that I wish I could intervene on, but we don't. That's for another night, another session. This may sound contrary to the safety message, but I think I would have told my younger self to spend more time out of my comfort zone than I did. I can think of times where I was conservative and probably missed out on some opportunities and experiences that would have been really meaningful to me and beneficial to my gaining of experience and wisdom. So I wish I had gotten out and gotten after it more in certain situations, for sure. I mean, I was, oftentimes I was with people I had a high level of trust in, and but I just had that hesitation that I think held me back.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so we'll open this up. If you have a question, you can unmute, ask your question, and then please mute again. Or if you're not comfortable with that, you can place your question in the meeting chat, and Lynn will read it as there's pauses and opportunities to do so.
So I'll go ahead and just read a comment that's in the chat. I think it's more of a comment than a question, but they say, this is a particular problem, and we're referring to slowing down. This is a particular problem when the weather is colder or wet and the entire group slows down and risks hypothermia because a slower hiker inappropriately joins a fast group. I suppose that's why we always bring lots of clothing and fluids. 2 liters is a great idea in this situation. Having a hiking pace listed is a great start. Yeah, thanks for your comment there on that.
Lisa Kent wrote, I think I had read that you have not been back to Franconia Ridge since your quote unquote moment. Do you think you will ever do that hike again?
Did you say Lisa?
Lisa Kent. Yep.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for the direct question. I do appreciate it. I have not been back on the ridge. I get asked that question from time to time, particularly when I'm talking about my own personal ordeal. It's not hesitation or fear of going back. It's just I haven't been back yet. But I want to go for sure. And I think, just to add to that, I don't regret that experience at all. I think it was a pretty awesome learning opportunity for me in many ways that has contributed, I think, to some of the work that we're doing here together tonight.
Hey, Ty, I know I said I was done with questions, but since nobody's jumping in that quickly, so I just have, and I know this doesn't fall within your, this is White Mountain National Forest and the, other groups, maybe the AMC, but I don't know. Emily has always been on my mind since the incident in the fall, and there's no matter what we do, the AMC, hiking buddies, you, me, like everyone, like we can go out there and we can do the best job possible. We can have unlimited funds. We can get into schools. We can offer training. We can talk. There's going to be people who climb mountains unprepared or just solo and just without a huge amount of experience. And we know these spots, like we know these areas that are like just repetitive areas where people can't find the trail and they end up in the same places, and Emily was one of those people who ended up in the same place that other people have ended before, missing the same 90-degree turn or whatever it is at that moment, in the winter. And I understand, and like I agree, maybe we don't want to put signs up, in the middle of the forest because that sort of takes away from, but like what can we do about this? Like, I mean, it just seems like when we've had multiple rescues in the same place and we've lost lives, that there's got to be this, like, there's got to be a point, right? Like some breaking point where there's, something's going to be built or put there, or some logs are going to be laid down, or, I guess that wouldn't help in the winter. But some like, is there like, do we feel like there's progression in thinking about those types of things? And like, is there is almost the leave no trace thought, like if I see a sign on the trail, as much as I don't want to see signs all over the trail, if I see one on my hike up to Lafayette, like it doesn't ruin my day. Like it doesn't ruin my hike. It doesn't make me feel like, wow, humans have really messed this up and now I have no tranquility. Like I don't feel that way. I mean, if you had signs for McDonald's cheeseburgers on the way up, then I would have a problem. But like a sign that tells me like this is the right way, um, I don't know. I'm just struggling a little bit with the fact that there's been multiple cases in this particular area.
Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from. There's been a couple of locations in the White Mountains that I've highlighted in some conversations with other organizations. I think the question then becomes, we know that hundreds of thousands of people go into the White Mountains every year, and a majority of them come out having had an awesome experience. Whenever human beings are going to go into unpredictable environments, there are going to be accidents, there's going to be problems, trouble, whatever. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, okay, you and I might feel very strongly about that 90-degree turn. I feel strongly about a trail inlet south of there, and but where does it stop? Because we could identify hundreds, if not thousands, of locations throughout the White Mountains, particularly above tree line, where some type of sign could be helpful. But how is that regulated? How is that managed? Where does it stop? Where does personal responsibility and preparation still come into the equation? It's a really hard question to answer. Yeah, my heart breaks for the people that have been lost in those what I would call those higher frequency locations for trouble. But I think, we see this play out down here all the time with intersections where there's a higher rate of accidents, and should we put a light up or a sign up? It happens here too, at sea level. So I'm not answering your question, but
No,
I struggle with that.
it's a loaded question.
Yep.
And we have these new, GPS devices and stuff that, tell us, when we're off trail pretty quickly. Like you can see, hey, I'm clearly not on the right trail here. But it's very difficult in a snowstorm with a map to be able to tell if you're off trail when you missed your turn. Like, most of the time you're in a bad winter situation, or you're in the cold, your phone's dead, you're using a map. Like if you start walking down what looks like a trail to you and ultimately is a trail into a river or into a water outlet, it's difficult to be able to tell, like, hey, I'm not on the right path. Whereas, some sort of, even if it's logs laying across the ground or something to just be like, hey, this clearly isn't the right way.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, Ben, for us to consider as we think about these kinds of things are, in those instances that we're talking about, would trail signage have led to a different outcome? I think you almost have to look at each of these to say, and in most cases we're never going to know where was the onset of hypothermia. Is it hypothermia that led to disorientation? Is it the weather? Is it the combination of the two? I do think those are factors in these things that we have to, there could have been a sign there that day, and maybe we'll never know, but would that have mattered in these cases that we're talking about? were these people already too far into this situation for that to have made a difference? And I just don't know.
And Lisa had raised her hand. I don't know if she wanted us to read her question, or if she wanted to ask a different question.
Thanks. I feel badly now. There's 3 chats, so I'll be quick, and then the chat people's comments can be read. It's a comment directly to Ty. So Ty, I'm an AMC hut volunteer, and I often am at Madison or Greenleaf. Being at those huts often means the recreators of the day or the overnight guests, either or, ask questions all the time about your stories. So it's an honor to answer their questions as someone who's a fan and always trying to keep up with your latest presentations and everything. And your messaging is always consistent. So I find it very easy to quote you, because from speech to speech to speech, the things you say are always the same. Like, you don't deviate from your message. So my question then is, the one thing that I get asked that I often can't answer is, how can people keep up with where you're going to be presenting, like, next? Like, how can they find out ahead of time where you'll be speaking? Because there's a pretty big fan base now.
Well, thank you for your question and your comments, and I appreciate the work that you do at the huts very much. I have a website. I have scaled back on scheduled presentations for a while because I'm working on another project. So I have an Instagram account, and I'm absolutely pathetic with it. I'm still learning it. My son's trying to help me navigate that. So that doesn't really answer your question, but I do have an event
section. What's your Instagram?
Full Conditions NH, at
Thank
Full
you.
Conditions NH. Yep. But I do have a section on my website, and I try to keep that updated. But right now, my speaking engagements are really, really limited. But I just need to do a better job of with that. And I appreciate your comments, and I'm very humbled by your comments too. So thank you.
Lynn, can you hit some more of these questions here?
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. So next we have a comment from Kathleen, her question, and that's, how does a new hiker that is older know what their pace really is?
Yeah, Kathleen, thank you. I was thinking of that myself as Ben and I were going through those loaded question scenarios. That I think maybe something for Hiking Buddies, the board, to consider is posting a video on how to measure your pace. How do you know how fast you walk or hike? Which is going to obviously be impacted by time, hydration, nutrition, and terrain and slope. All of those things will factor in temperature. But I think it sounds like people have questions about that kind of thing. So maybe that's a resource that could be explored. It's a really good idea, Kathleen.
It's funny you say that. We actually have a video series we're planning on building out, so that's fantastic. We'll put that in the queue. I saw Lynn writing it down. So.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Kathleen. So the next one we have is from Marie, and Marie says, what happens when you think you can keep up and you have experience, but yet the pace is faster? I was on a hike and it was a very fast pace. What then?
Ben, you want me to go first, or do you want to?
Yeah, I can tackle that as well. If the pace is much faster at any point, there's just got to be some communication about the fact that the pace is faster than what was previously agreed upon. Hopefully there was a conversation, prior to the hike, and hopefully the pace that you're able to hike at is the pace that was agreed upon prior to the hike as well, just for the sake of that. But I do think, for the most part, that goes back to kind of what Ty was saying before about having a conversation about, like, hey, we said this was going to be a slow pace hike. Clearly this is going faster. Are we thinking we might break this up into two groups, assuming the group was large, or are we going to stay together as a team? I'm not comfortable at the pace that we're going right now. Is there any way we could maybe slow down a little bit, or is there someone that would be willing to kind of hang back with me? I think those conversations are just appropriate in that case, rather than pushing yourself to a point that you're not feeling safe.
Yep. Thanks, Ben. That's a good point. It just being really communicative with the folks on your hike, and just don't be afraid to say, hey, you know what, this is not exactly, I know we set expectations, but this hike isn't quite meeting those expectations. So good thought, Marie. The next one we have is AK, and they say, given your extensive knowledge of risk management, I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about how demographics play into risk assessment. For example, I've always heard groups with women are more risk adverse than groups with only men. I find it interesting that women are perceived to be safer, particularly with Kate, given her gender, background, and previous experiences in mountain terrain.
Yeah, it's been my experience that it's not gender specific in terms of risk taking, risk tolerance, because we've seen examples all across time of men and women running into trouble. I think it's not isolated to one particular gender. I mean, I think there are studies on out there on risk taking in males between the ages of, I think, 18 and 30 or so, and the frontal cortex is still developing, into our mid 20s, and risk tolerance and risk taking activity tends to be higher. But again, I'm really cautious about generalizing this, or putting these in silos, because again, I think we see examples across the board on people getting into trouble regardless of that demographic. It's been people in their 70s and 80s, and as we've seen, in their late teens and 20s. It kind of runs the gambit.
All right, thanks, Ty. Next one we have is from Robert, and he says, in winter hiking, do you recommend fast and light or slow and heavy?
Robert, okay, these are good questions tonight. I think I'm about individual decision making, and people knowing themselves and making these decisions. The only thing I'm going to say, and I think you can make an argument for both, because fast and light allows you to move through terrain more quickly, and the more quickly you're moving through that terrain, you could make an argument the less time you're spending there and the less exposed you are to unpredictability and changing conditions. However, the downside of that is if something does go wrong, I have not brought a lot of gear with which I can, self-preserve until I can either get myself out, or somebody can come and get me. On the heavy and slow side, I'm carrying a lot of extra weight, which means I'm probably spending more time in that environment. So you could make the argument that the more time I'm there, the greater the risk of me being exposed to sudden changes or unpredictability. But at least I have stuff. So again, I think I can sit here and tell you that the obvious answer is, oh, bring gear in the winter. But there are people that don't. And I think it's just it's individually, you have to weigh those risks and recognize that it's not just about you, that the consequences go beyond you. You have people that love you and care about you, and you have a search and rescue community that's going to drop everything they're doing to come out and try to help you, at their own personal risk. So I think it's an individual decision, but the consequences go beyond you. So I think it's just factoring that in.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty. I'll throw in a question, and that is just, I know there's a lot of people on here that are have either read your books or are dying to read them. So can you just tell us the best way to go about getting one of your books into our own bookshelves?
Yes. Thank you. First and foremost, I think many of the public libraries in New Hampshire have one or both, and if they don't, they can get them on interlibrary loan. And then I would really suggest, if you're going to purchase either book, please consider doing so at a local independent bookstore, Gibson's, Water Street in Exeter, Mountain Wanderer in Lincoln. Steve Smith's been awesome. White Birch Books in Conway, Innisfree Books in Meredith. I'm just rattling off all of the bookstores where I've just had such positive experiences and support from the owners of those independent bookstores and the staff that work there. So the path of least resistance may be a mouse click, but I think there's something about supporting our local independent bookstores and libraries for sure.
Definitely agree. Thank you very much. So I have a couple more questions here, and Rhonda would like to know if you can tell us what you're currently working on.
Hi, Rhonda. Thank you for your question. I am working on a story that takes place in the presidential range, and taking a similar approach to the other stories that I've told. So I'm hoping it's out this year. And Rhonda, if I could just leave it there, that would be awesome.
That's great. Thanks. We understand your need for discretion on that. So thanks for giving us a sneak peek. Let's see. We have next. Margaret would like to know, do you have plans to write more books?
No, I think you just said.
Yeah,
I mean,
Margaret,
it's a little
I am
different,
working on one. I am working on one now, and then after that, I'm just going to kind of take a step back for a bit. Obviously, I'll be talking with folks about the new book for a while, but also just taking a step back and just evaluating. I think I will always write. It's just a matter of what form that writing takes.
Lynn, why'd you skip my question?
All right. Well, Ben Pease has a question for you, Ty. The question is, wearing the Hiking Buddies hat he gave you.
Oh, that's in a really safe area. So
Yeah,
yes, I should have. I didn't want to
boy,
go overboard, Ben.
I tried to save you from it, Ty, but he called me
That's
out.
okay.
So
Yeah, he should have. I should have worn it.
all right, good. So I'm not going to try to pronounce who this is. Okada Briga says, have you read Second Absent by Alison Osius?
Second Ascent.
Maybe it is
I have.
Ascent. Yeah. Yep.
I have. Yep.
Yep.
I actually have it right over there.
Look at that. All right, good question there. And Doug says, will your writing always be about hiking and mountains?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking. I don't know. That's part of my kind of step back after this one's done to see. Yeah, I don't know.
I like Robert made a comment. It's not a question, but he's laying down the law, Ty. He said, I make your books required reading for anyone who wants to join me for a winter hike. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Got to do your homework.
Nice of you to say. Yeah.
Nice one.
My wife read your book, Kate, Where You'll Find Me, and she now actually every time we go up north, she's like, ever since I read that book, I just get an eerie feeling when I look at that mountain. Just kind of like has stayed with her, a little bit too. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy so much about your writing. It's just, the story kind of just it's hard to get away from it. Like you just, when you're seeing the mountains, like you get really connected to the.
Yeah, and I just talked to a sixth grade class who was they were listening to each book on audio, and went in to talk to them. And my intent is never to scare people, because I think the White Mountains in particular are beautiful and awesome, and there's so much to be gained personally by being in that environment. I think for me, it's really about awareness and respect for the terrain and what you're heading into, and sharing stories of people who have gone there, and that their lives are bigger than that single defining moment that we tend to focus on. There's much more to their story than that one finite event, and just recognizing, we're all human, and empathy is, I think, really important. And then at the same time, celebrating our incredible search and rescue community here in New Hampshire, many of whom are volunteer.
100%.
Hi,
All right.
I'm curious. I have one more, Ben.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. I'm curious if you have advice for newer, newer leaders, or somebody who's never led a hiking buddies hike, or another type of, maybe bringing their friends out. What advice might you give to that newer leader?
I think be humble, recognize you have this this kind of honor of leading a group of people who are out to do the same thing that you are, to share in an experience, recognizing where we came from. We all, as I said, we all started with zero experience. I think it's okay to be vulnerable with that group, and hey, I've been out and things haven't always gone as I've planned, and I've learned so much from that. Maybe they have experiences to share in that regard as well. I think that helps build trust within the group. But I also think it's recognizing you don't have all the answers, you're not all knowing, and there's probably skill sets and attributes within that team that can be really helpful to you as the leader, but also helpful to contributing to a really positive outcome for the group as a whole. And so again, it's not about you, it's about the people you're with and supporting them, but also leaning on them, recognizing you don't have all the answers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Ty. So it's about 8:15. I want to thank you so much for signing in, just having a discussion with us. It went in several different directions that even I didn't necessarily plan in the beginning, but I think it was fantastic. It gives people the opportunity to just kind of, ask what's on their mind, and us as well as Hiking Buddies leadership. And, just really appreciate you coming on, being willing, and we look forward to having you back in a couple months to talk about a slightly different subject matter. So we hope anybody who's on that enjoyed this will not only join us again in a couple months for the next time Ty's with us, but let others know. We think it's good. It's good messaging, good information. He provides a lot of value, and it allows us to have these open dialogues and ask great questions. So thank you, Ty.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Ben, Lynn, and all the members of the board and everyone who signed in tonight. I really appreciated your questions. The one thing I'd ask you to consider, going back to search and rescue, the New Hampshire Outdoor Council is an organization I truly believe in. It's a nonprofit, and they provide financial support, grants, equipment to search and rescue throughout New Hampshire, and also the Mount Washington Observatory, which gives us that access to that higher summits forecast at no cost. And just two really valuable organizations that mean a lot to me. So please consider supporting them.
Awesome. And we hope to get great connections with us and those organizations as well. And you're going to be the conduit for that, Ty.
Happy to help.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you on the trails. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone. Be safe. Have fun. Get after it.
All right.